and kind of get all the information that we need to design a zine. This is for Typography 2, and what we're going to do is make a zine by hand, which is doing type layout and doing page layout by hand. I think this is important because it gives us an opportunity to work in a media that really will bite you if you make mistakes. One of the big advantages of digital work is that you can always undo, go back to a previous revision, whatever, and get your work back, and you'll be fine. The interesting thing about working on physical media is that if you screw up, you screw up, and sometimes it's nice to have that sort of positive reinforcement of when you do well, it works, when you don't do well, it doesn't work. So the first thing for planning our zine, and a zine is just generally a simple magazine. Purposes of this, I am going to work on a small set of rules for a tabletop game. So there might be some choices that I make that are specific to that might be different than something, say, if you wanted to do a campus newsletter or a art club magazine or something like that. That's your choice. You'll just make some different decisions as to what is going to go on in your magazine or your zine. First thing, I think this is obvious, is picking a size. This is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Generally, when we think of the size of an 8.5 by 11, we use it vertically, and it's each side like this. For zines, for smaller things, we generally want to take this and fold it in half. One of the nice things about doing that is that it allows us to print this on a standard printer. So we can print both sides on a standard printer that has duplexing, right? Duplexing is printing on both sides. And that will allow us to do both sides of our document as opposed to saying just one and then having white on the back. We don't want that. That's not a good use of space. So a lot of this is going to be how do we use the small space really well to get what we need done. So what I'm going to do is, again, we're not going to use the full sheet. I'm going to use a half sheet. So just like we're going to do this by hand, I also like planning by hand. That's just a personal thing. I like planning out on a piece of paper. It just feels right, feels better, makes sense. It's my preference. So now we have, instead of our 8.5 by 11, we have kept our 8.5 dimension, but instead of 11, we're at 5.5 on this axis. So we're 5.5 by 8.5. This is what I'm going to use for my zine today. You guys can go further, right? You could fold this again down. We have quarters, right? If I unfold this, we'll have folded it down to quarters. This makes a nice little zine if you want to do narrative content, if you want to do comics and things like that. These are great because they split up your page more. You have more splits. You'll realize here that you're going to have an issue. When you have a more complicated fold like this, when you open this, you go to the middle pages, right? You don't go to page 1. So if you wanted to go from, the cover to the inside, you get stuck because you're attached across the top or across the bottom depending on how you folded it. So you have two options there. One, you can take a razor blade, trim the top little bit of this off, and it'll cut the fold out, and you'll just have your binding on this side. That is how books are often done, right? It's folded from a much bigger sheet of paper, and then they trim all the outside edges, and you get them cut free. Sometimes you'll get like a textbook where the page is attached at the top or bottom, rarely on the outside. Usually it's top or bottom, where the page is attached and doesn't let you open it like this, and you have to cut the page free. That's what's happened. That page moved down just enough to miss that knife coming down and cleaning off that fold. So that does give you an option here, is that you can cut this, or you can leave it intact. Then you can have cover, inside page 1, inside page 2, back cover, and then you can do an interesting thing of having an inside poster. So if you were doing something like a comic that was inviting people to come to see an animated feature or something like that, well, you could have your content just like a normal zine and then have like a big invitation movie poster on the inside. Or in the case of like what I'm going to be working on is game rules. Well, what I might have is, you know, cover, pretty cover, and then I might have rules, and then you open this up and it's a map or something like that. So there's options with how we do our folds. It can get more complicated as we add more pages. I'm going to be doing more pages than the 2, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So these little small ones can be really interesting because you can do these interesting folds. You can also do things like cutting only one side and leaving the other side intact. So as you open it and fold it out, you get more interesting shapes, but that's a whole nother thing. So this is a little bit small for what I'm going to do, but I would really suggest this size if you're interested in storytelling. I think it gives you more pages and can give you more interesting options. This is one I already folded. This is actually 2 pages. And when we do this, and when we want to add more pages in, we don't take our folded piece and lay it on top of our new piece and staple them together. It's not how we do it. What we're going to do is we're going to open up this one, put this one in here, fold it back. So now we have 2 pages that are inside of one another. So you can see that, where it's one inside of the next one. And that is how I'm going to do mine. I'll probably end up actually with more pages than this, but this will give us all a good idea of how we count our pages and how we kind of determine where stuff is. Marker, keep track. I'm going to use my physical copy. This is something that people get wrong, is where pages go in this. For designing this, I'm going to design this all as physical objects, and then I'm actually going to scan them into my computer and then print them traditionally from there. So I have a scanner copier sitting behind me. I mean, it's just a cheap laser brother, I think. And I'm going to use that to kind of do the very traditional, like, over-scanned, over-copied feel to my zine. But then when I'm ready to have it for real and maybe send it to other people, I can scan in those final pages, save it as a PDF, and send it out. So it's always a really nice option, having both the physical and digital versions of this. We'll talk more about that when we get into generating content for our zine. So this page is our cover. All right, this is our cover. I also like to put an up arrow somewhere, especially if I'm doing the more complicated folds. Up arrows are immensely helpful. Cover, I'm going to go the wrong way. I'm actually going to go to the back. Back cover. Now, because this is a zine and we're not doing a full book, we don't have a spine width, so we don't have to worry about content on the spine. We just don't have to think about that. You might want to think about something where if you have your print go around, where it gives you some sort of like line code, especially if you have a bunch of them stacked, you can get interesting line patterns going. But we're not going to worry about that for this. So cover, back cover. We're going to open this just like it was a normal book. And this is going to be... this is generally the page where there's like all the copyright information and stuff like that, but I'm not really going to have most of that. So I'm just going to say that this is going to be my intro page. Intro page. And because we're planning this out, I'm just going to go ahead and plan this. I'm going to say this is my intro page, and this is also going to be my table of contents. So my table of contents is also going to go on this page. This will not be a numbered page. We'll get there in a second. So this page here will be page 1. Now, page 1 will be the first numbered page. So I do want to remember that these are going to need numbers. And then this is page 2, 3, and we can just use a P if we want to keep track. P4 and P5. So, I now have 2 sets of papers that are going to be all the pages. I have on this first one, front cover, back cover are going to be spread across the outside. Intro page and page 5 are spread. Page 1 and page 4, spread. Page 2 and page 3 are my inside spread. So this is the only actual facing spread I'm going to have in this whole thing. So if I want an image to go across both, like if I want a big image to go across these pages, then I need to design that so it's on page 4 and on page 5, which are actually on two completely different documents, right? This seam here matches this seam here. If you want the proof, you can do this. That's where that seam will go. And then you can see how those are going to meet up. Now realize that if you want to do spreads like that, it's totally cool, it works. And this is something you can actually see in magazines as well, is that sometimes you won't fold the page right, or the printer will print slightly off. And what will happen is that over on this side, you'll actually end up with this page having shifted. And you'll get a little line of this image from back here, right here. So we don't like that. So I generally like to go to a neutral color in the center, just to keep me from having to deal with this. Of course, if you're going with to a book with the really deep spine, then it doesn't matter because the fold is going to hide that little bit of art. But in something like this, where it's a relatively thin book, you're gonna see those edges. So be real cautious with doing that. So this is our size of our document. We now have a general plan on page numbers. We have a general plan on page numbers. I know that for my document, I want a cover, a back cover. I do want that intro page. And then the rest of my pages, you noticed I didn't really put content on them. That's okay, because I don't know how many pages it's going to be yet. I have my content written out as a text document, and that will be brought into this. Let's look at this as our page size. I am going to get a fresh sheet, just so it's not as confusing. So we have our page. I'm going to treat this as an inside page. We're not really going to worry about the cover quite yet, because the cover and back cover of most documents, or most books, are really different than the interior, right? Like you open up to any page on the inside and all those pages are going to kind of look like each other. The outside, the covers are going to look different, so we're not quite going to worry about those yet. So here we have our single page. I'm just going to use this half, so if we need to undo it, we can use this side. So I know that my overall page size is 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. Right, 8.5 inches this way, 5.5 inches across the top. Now, because of, binding the thing, and because of printers not being the best, or this is the thing, is that you can know how good your printer is. But if you're sending these files off to somebody else, sometimes you don't know how good their printers are. So one thing that I like to do is put in a 1/2 inch margin all the way around the edge. Now those are big margins. 1/2 inch margins are huge, but I just find that it looks nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 1/2 inch margins all the way around, just like I would in Illustrator. You've watched my stuff on Illustrator, and it's just kind of the way I start my document. You can also just use a ruler. These calipers are just kind of what I had. One thing that's also an option, and one thing that I actually like, is on any sort of book style document, I actually like bringing the bottom up a little bit. So I'm going to go to 3/4 of an inch. Oh, let's get that. There we go. 3/4 of an inch for my bottom. And what that's going to do is that's going to give us just a little bit extra white space at the bottom, and it's going to keep our page from looking like it's sagging keep our content from looking like it's sagging in the image. So we're good there. So I have 1/2 inch, that's 1/2 on each side, 1/2 on the top, and 3/4 on the bottom. So those are my edge dimensions for my document. That leaves me with a certain amount of space on the inside of this document, and that's the space that my content goes into. My content goes into this way, 5.5 minus 1/2 minus 1/2. That's going to give me 4.5 inches for where I actually want my content. If I have a picture or something like that, and I don't really care if the edges get cut off because of the printer shift, then I don't need to follow this 4.5. But for things like text, where if it got cut off, it would really screw up my document, I'm going to be real careful to stay inside this 4.5. And remember, we're making a zine. This is going to be a little grungy, it's going to be a little silly, it's going to be a little absurd, and that's totally okay. So now what I want to do is figure out what my interior vertical height is, and that is 8.5 minus 1/2, which is going to give us 8, minus 3/4, which is going to give us 7 1/4. So it's 7 1/4 this way. And we have 4 1/2 this way. I guess I should use measurements. So this is our interior size. Let me get a straight edge and I will draw that. I'm going to use this as a straight edge because it's what I got. Now, on your final document, you are not going to put these lines. This is a sheet that is for planning. I am not going to put these lines on the final thing. If I was going to put marks on the final thing, I would do very fine marks in pencil, so I could then erase it once I'm done pasting my new objects onto the document. Okay, so that's showing my margins. And we have our interior, our overall, and our interior, our overall, and our interior. Now, with this is not the cover page. Remember, this is one of our interior pages. With this, I'm going to want text. We have a very simple choice at this point. Do we want 1 column, 2 columns, or 3 columns? Same issue that we've had before with setting up a document. The reason it's absolutely vital to decide this ahead of time in a zine is because for most of your text, you're going to be printing it out. You're going to be picking your column size, printing it out, cutting the text out, and then pasting it up traditionally, like very traditionally. So we're going to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what size this is going to be. Remember, what you need is the width of a column plus the width of another column plus a gutter. So if you're doing 1 column, it's fine, right? Your column is just 4.5 inches wide. You set your column width to 4.5 inches when you're setting your text. You just lay it out, hit print, cut that out, and put it on your page. But if we want to do 2 columns, what I might do is a 1/2 inch in the center, right? I could do a 1/2 inch gutter in the center and give me 2 columns. So a 1/2 inch gutter in the center would give me, right, we're at 4.5, so if I took out 1/2 inch, that would give me 2 2-inch columns. So I can measure that out. Double check that that center is indeed 1/2 inch, and it's pretty close. So I could set myself, if I wanted 2 columns, this is 2-inch column, this is a 2-inch column, and this is 1/2 inch for the gutter. That's fine. I think for mine, I think I want 3 columns just to give me a little bit more option. I'll show you what I mean by having more options. We can kind of use it as a modified grid. 3 columns gets a little bit more complicated. And before we continue, these columns could be whatever width you wanted with whatever gutter you wanted. This just, the math worked out real fast, so that's what we used. So what I am going to do is instead, I'm going to do 3. I like 3 columns. I don't know, the design just works well for me. So I could say I have 4.5 inches. If I make each of those columns 1.5 inches wide, that adds up to 4.5 inches. That would be great. But I need a gutter. I need that space in between so you don't have text running into other text. We need that little bit of breathing room in between stuff. So now our math gets hard. Well, I know I can't do the 1.5 inches. What about 1.25 inches? So I can say, all right, well, I'm going to have 1.25 inches, right? I'm going to have 1.25 times 3 is going to give us 3.75. And then what that's going to do is 4.5 minus 3.75. So with that we have 3/4 inch to make not one gutter, but to make 2 gutters out of. So we have to take that 0.75, divide that by 2. That gives us 0.375. That 0.375 is going to be pretty hard to measure. Right? I don't have a 0.375 on here. I don't have that. It's going to be weird, and I don't like that, and that makes my life hard. I like doing design the easy way. So when we want to do this easy for 3 columns, we're just going to cheat a little bit. I know that each of my columns is 1.25 inches. I know that. That's easy. So I know that my left column is going to be 1.25 inches. That puts me to there. Now I know that this column over here is going to be the same, 1.25 inches. That puts me to about right there. Now this is where we're going to cheat. Instead of measuring in the 0.375 here, what we're going to do is we're going to find a center point. And the center point of 4.5 is 2.25. Gets us to right there. Then from that we take our column width, which is 1.28. We're going to take that down to, you know, the 1 becomes half and that becomes 1/8. So we're going to go to 5/8, which is right there. Boop. So that center column, there's 2 ways to do it. You can either measure out, measure the gap, measure across, measure the gap, or come in from both sides. Or you can do this and start from the center. I like doing it this way. It's personal preference. This is something you're not really going to do professionally. This is something you're going to do for fun or to make interesting designs. This is paste up. If you mess it up a little bit, it's just going to look cooler. That's totally okay. So this gives us column 1, column 2, and column 3. There we go. So now we have our 3-column layout. We have our space around. We have our gutters, right? We have these 2 little gutters here that are this strange dimension. We have our 1/2 inch margins all the way around. And we have our 3/4 inch margin at the bottom. So this is our basic text layout for our document. Now let's go ahead and write down some of these things. So we know that our column width is going to be 1.25. That's what our column width is going to be. We know the height of our column is not going to exceed, we know the height of that column is not going to exceed 7.25. That's our height. So we have those two measurements there. So when I'm setting a text box, I know if I go longer than that, I need to split it up. I need to split it up somehow, especially if I'm doing design that's going to have other stuff in it and not just a full bar of text. In addition to our column width, this is actually our 1 column width. This is if we use 1 column. But what if I want to do something a little snazzy and have a text box that covers 2 of these columns? Well, I can do that. That might make my design look very nice. So I need to know what this dimension is for a 2-column box. And a 2-column box is not just double a 1-column box, because we have 1.25, 1.25, and then we have in here, we have our 0.375. That is going to add up to 1.875. Oh, sorry, 2.875, because I can totally do math. 2.875 is our 2-column width. Our height doesn't change. We don't have to worry about that, right? Because we can run that column the whole way down just the same. Our 3-column width is easy. What's our 3-column width? Right, our 3-column width is 4.5 inches. Now, our page width is 5.5, and our page height is 8.5. So this is a very standard piece of paper. So like these last two measurements, it's dumb for me to write these down. But that's not always the case. You might be using a strange size of paper, or you might be using some other system, or you might know that you're going to be, trimming a 1/4 inch off each side. Go ahead and write all this stuff down. It'll make your life easier later. This is what this planning is for, is just to have all this information so you just don't have to make it up later on. One thing to consider as well for our margins, I leave these 1/2 inch margins. This might not be enough for some kinds of binding. For the binding that we'll probably do for our zines, this is going to be folded, and when you do multiples, you put them inside each other, just like I talked about, and then you actually get a big deep throat stapler and just staple, and that's your binding, and that puts your book together. So they'll just be edge stapled. There are other ways to do it. You can do a perfect binding, you can do ring binding, you can do a punch hole binding. Let's just go and do the test as to whether this design will work with a 3-ring binder, right? We work in education. For games, for the people that might be playing this game, a lot of people like to keep their rules in a 3-ring binder. So let's go see if that's going to work. Here we go. We have our 3-ring binder. I am going to align top, just because that's kind of my preference. If I'm going to put this in a 3-ring binder, I like smaller things to be up towards the top, but that's your choice. So I'm going to put this here. Punch. Okay. We have trouble. These holes are overlapping right here. These holes are overlapping. Well, I don't like that at all. That does not work for me, because I'm going to have text that runs right up to this line, right? Because this is supposed to be our free area. I'm going to have text that comes right up to there. That's just not going to work for me. So now we say, all right, well, what can I do to get all of this stuff to move over without, doing sorts of weird math? Well, this is a weird number. That's a weird number, right? That's a very strange number. So why don't we say, well, I just don't like that anymore, and I'm going to do 0.25 instead. Well, if I do 0.25 instead, well, then all of a sudden I've given myself space. And I can give myself space starting here or starting here. Our trouble is here. So we're going to start here, and I'm going to get a new piece of paper so we can show how this is done. So now we have our new document. The only thing we've changed is the gutter has gone from 0.375 to 0.25 on this document. So now we have 0.5 here. This is the same, 0.75. This is the same, 0.5 up here. But now this is the same, 1.25, 1.25, 1.25, but now this is 0.25, 0.25. This is our new one. This is no longer 0.5, so now we have 0.75 here. So 0.5, all these, and then 0.75 on our inside, and we have 0.75 on our bottom. If I had not already decided to do this 0.75, I would go ahead and do that because I do not like either of these being bigger than this one at the bottom. So if you have to bring this out for some reason, go ahead and bring the bottom one up as well. Now we can test it. Again, if you're not using a 3-hole binder, this might not be something that matters to you at all. Let's see. Ha. Much better. Look at that. Now I know that all of my content is going to read completely fine. I don't have to worry about my words getting too close to these little holes. I'll have plenty of space for my content to breathe here without getting cut off. So I like this one much more. We do need to redo some of our values, right? We did all these values, but now these are wrong. Our 1 column width is still 175 by 7.25. That's correct. Our 2 column width, well, that's just wrong now. So our 2 column width is going to be actually a little easier to calculate, right? It's 1.25 plus 1.25 is 2.5 plus 0.25, so that's going to be 2.75. So we have 2 3/4 inches. Oh, that looks like feet. 2.75 inches for our 2 column width. Our page width is going to be 5.5 and 8.5. Our 3 column width is no longer going to be that. Our 3 column width is now 3.75 for 4.25. So our 3 column width is now 4.25. And right, if I was a more organized person, I would write this out all nicely, but I'm not, so I'm not going to. But now we have a page that works with my use case. Your use case might be different. You might be doing something else with your page. You might have to think about the edges in some different way. Mine, hole punches were important for what I'm doing, so I'm happy to give myself that extra space. So now I have my page laid out. I have my measurements right here. One thing to consider is that if facing page is on the other side, this is no longer symmetric, right? The center line is actually somewhere over here. It's not symmetric anymore. So realize when I do the page on this other side, I need to put my 0.75 here in the middle and then work out, or work in from this way, but these need to be mirrors of each other because this is no longer mirrored on its center line. So just be cautious that if you do something weird like this, that the opposite page has the gutter, or has the extra margin to the fold inside, or the extra margin to the outside, if that's what you're doing. So that's binding. So test your binding, or check your binding. You can go measure, go find a book that's bound that way, and you'll find different ways to do it. We have our columns. Now we need to pick our font size, because I'm not going to be like cutting letters out serial killer style from a magazine and pasting them on here. That makes me crazy, and I don't think it looks good. So I'm actually going to use the digital tools we have to make my text, right? I can just go ahead and make my text. So I know that my column width is going to be 1.25. I know my 2 column width is going to be 2.75, and I know my 3 column width is going to be 4 1/4. So I like fonts for reading in books. I think anything from 8 point to maybe 11 point, but I think 11's a little big, is good for reading. Probably more like 10 point. And that's good for reading, especially something that's, you know, up close like that. So let's see if these work for these column widths. Remember that our rule for how wide we can go with a certain font is 8 points times 30. and it's 8 points times 30, and then to go from points to inches, you guys remember how many points are in an inch? It is 72 points per inch. So what we can do is it's this divided by 72. So we have 8 times 30 is 240, divided by 72 is about 3.3. I think that's 3.3 repeating. So 3.3 inches. So that's how wide we can go with a column with 8-point type. And I want to use 8-point type because I want to get a lot of stuff in my little book. So 3.3. So I can make a 1 column, right? That's fine. I can make a 2 column. We're under 3.3 inches. One thing I cannot do is a 3 column wide column is going to be too much. It's going to be wider than our acceptable allowance for that point size. So I'm not going to do any 3 column width text. So no 3 column width text. I just know that this is not ever going to happen. It makes everyone in the whole world sad. So we're not going to do that. I'm just going to use 1 column and 2 column. When you pick your point size, you can do it the other way around, right? If you have a column width, so if you have, so this is, you know, X points times 30 over 72 equals whatever. If we have X and we want to go all the way to 4.25, we can just make this equal to 4.25 and do the algebra backwards to figure out how big our point size should be. So we can do that if you want to go the backwards way. I just know that I want to use 8 point, so I know that I'm not going to do any 3 column stuff. This of course changes if you have 2 columns instead. So something to think about. So I know I'm going to have 8 point. So this is going to go on my list of facts that I have about my document, my choices that I'm making now, so I don't screw stuff up and then have to change it all later, because unlike digital, it's very, very hard to change this stuff physically. The last thing when we're planning this document is the every page content. And by every page content, I mean the stuff that you see on every page. So if I look at this copy of Beowulf, right? Cover is completely different than the outside, but every inside page has a few things that are repeated. So this, weirdly enough, has this little border line. So that art I know I'm going to need on every page if I do this. I know that I'm going to need the word Beowulf, and I'm going to need a page number. So those are 3 things that every page is going to have, no matter what the actual content is, no matter where all the rest of this stuff is. This edge, this bit of text here, and this number is going to be the same. So one thing I could do is, once I kind of know what my background is going to look like, I could photocopy 1 page and then just keep using that and swapping out the numbers, or I just know that that's something that I'm going to need. So for this document, for my rules, all I really need for every page content is going to be a background of some kind. And I'm going to put a question mark next to that because I'm not sure if I want the background to be the same on every page or somewhat different. And the next thing I know I'm going to want is I do want page numbers. I do want page numbers on every page. I want page numbers on every page. I did my little thing. I want, this one doesn't get it, but from here on I want page numbers. They don't necessarily need to be in that corner, but I do want page numbers. So I need background maybe. I'm going to get some page numbers going on. And then the other thing that I want is I might want the title on every page. I do like that in that other book, seeing the title on every page, and that's just really a question of whether or not you have the space on the document to do it. Some people also like have a little cartoon in a corner or a little symbol in the corner. You can do that. It's totally your choice. You can do a watermark down the center of the page. It's entirely up to you, but these are things that you might want to think about because they go on every page. Now, this is the basics of planning a zine, getting 1-page plan, getting a basic overall concept done. In the next video, we are going to cover actually laying out a single page within our zine.